Edward Marshall lowered himself into the armchair that still remembered her presence. The leather held the faintest perfume, one that lingered even after she had walked away. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen, to the silence, to the empty space where Chloe Bennett's voice used to fill the air with quick, restless words. At 63, he had believed in love, believed it still had room for him, believed it could heal what the years had quietly stolen. But now, the house only gave him stillness, and stillness was never the dream. He wondered, not with anger, but with that deep ache that bends a man's shoulders. How did it all begin? How did something that felt so alive end in such quiet? The answer lay not in the room, but in memory. And so he turned back, not quickly, not desperately, but slowly. Like opening an old letter you're not sure you want to read. It had been a late spring evening when Edward Marshall first saw her. The kind of evening when the air is soft and forgiving, when even the tired carry themselves a little lighter. The gala was crowded, filled with voices that blurred together into polite laughter and clinking glasses. Edward stood apart, holding a glass he had barely touched, the way a man does when he feels half in the room, half somewhere else. That was when Chloe Bennett entered. 26, with a dress the color of midnight and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She moved through the room with a kind of precision, as if each step had been rehearsed, each word measured before it left her lips. Edward saw in her what he wanted to see: youth, promise, a spark that could light the shadows of his later years. She saw in him something different: steadiness, wealth, the possibility of a door she could step through when the time was right. But that night, neither revealed their truth. They spoke of books, of travel, of the music that lingered in their childhood homes. And for a moment, it felt like love was possible. For him, and maybe, just maybe for her. When they left the hall, they did not walk side by side, but the thought of her lingered with him like the last note of a song you hum without knowing why. Word spread quickly. It always does when age and love try to stand in the same room. Edward's friend spoke softly at first. "She's young enough to be your daughter. Are you sure she cares for you, and not your name?" Their voices carried caution, not cruelty, but the seed was planted all the same. Chloe's circle was less gentle. "So this is your plan?" they teased. "Skip the struggle? Leap into comfort?" She laughed with them, but never denied it. Not out loud. Edward pretended not to hear the whispers. He wanted to believe in the tenderness of her hand on his arm, the way her laughter seemed to smooth the edges of his solitude. And yet, in quiet moments, doubt knocked softly at the back of his mind. Chloe told herself she wasn't unkind. After all, she gave him her time, her smile, her presence. But in her private thoughts, she measured. She counted what could be gained, and wondered when it would be enough to leave. And so, two truths walked together. One built on belief, the other on calculation. From the outside, it looked like love. On the inside, it carried the soft fracture that time would eventually split wide open. Summer came, and with it invitations. Dinners, charity events, galas. Edward Marshall did not like the noise of such evenings, but with Chloe Bennett beside him, he carried himself differently. He smiled more. He stood straighter. He felt younger in ways he could not name. When they entered a ballroom together, heads turned, some in admiration, some in disbelief, a few in envy. The whispers followed them like a second orchestra, playing a tune neither of them could silence. For Edward, these gatherings were proof that love could still bloom, no matter the season of a man's life. He saw in Chloe the warmth of companionship, the possibility of laughter at the breakfast table, of soft conversation in the quiet hours before sleep. But for Chloe, each night was a stage. She noticed who noticed her. She watched which glances carried approval and which carried judgment. She did not miss the way people lingered on her youth and his years. Nor did she miss the opportunities that came with proximity to a man like Edward, the way doors opened when she walked in holding his arm. They danced once, slowly, while others spun faster on the polished floor. Edward leaned close and whispered that he hadn't danced in years, but with her, it felt natural again. Chloe smiled. She placed her head against his shoulder, but her eyes, just over his back, were fixed on a mirror across the room. In the glass, she saw herself not as his partner, but as someone rehearsing her next step. And so, while Edward heard music and felt hope, Chloe heard only time, ticking, measuring, counting. The crowd saw a couple, but within that frame, love and calculation wove themselves together in silence. At home, the world was softer. No chandeliers, no crowd, just the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of an old wooden floor, the steady tick of the clock above the mantel. It was in those hours, in the comfort of his living room, that Edward spoke most openly. He told Chloe about his childhood summers at the lake, how he once dreamed of writing, but instead built a career that left him with little time for words. He confessed his fear of growing old alone, of having no one to share the quiet with when the phone stopped ringing and the days grew too still. He promised her care, promised her security, promised her the kind of steady presence he thought every woman deserved. His voice carried not wealth, not power, but a gentleness only age can give. Chloe listened. She nodded. Sometimes she touched his hand, as if to reassure him she understood. Yet inside, her mind wandered. She thought of trips she wanted to take alone, of friends her age, laughing in places where no one asked about the years between them and their partners. She thought of an exit, not because she hated him, but because she feared being trapped before she had truly lived. Edward, blind to her distance, continued. He spoke of a garden he wanted to plant together in the spring, of small things like walking in the park and watching the leaves turn. He believed in a future with her, believed enough for both of them. When Chloe kissed him goodnight, he closed his eyes with gratitude. She closed hers with calculation. Love had been spoken. Promises had been made, but only one of them meant every word. Time does what it always does. It reveals. At first, the cracks were almost invisible. Chloe seemed distracted at dinner, her phone lighting up under the table, while Edward tried to tell a story from his younger days. She smiled less when he spoke of the future. She lingered longer when she left the house, as if the air outside carried a freedom she craved. Edward noticed, though he tried not to. He told himself she was simply young, that her world was faster, noisier, filled with more movement than his own. He wanted to believe the distance was only a shadow, not a wall. But late at night, when the house grew quiet, he found himself watching the empty chair across from him. He remembered how quickly she had left after dinner, how vague her explanations had been, and doubt, soft but insistent, began to press against his heart. Chloe, for her part, began to feel the weight of his gaze. His questions, though gentle, felt heavy. "Are you happy? Do you see us lasting?" They weren't accusations, but they felt like chains. She pulled back, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear that staying too long would cost her more than she was willing to give. And so the fracture widened, though neither spoke it aloud. Love tried to hold the silence together. Plans tried to break it apart. And between those two truths, a quiet tension began to settle. One that would not stay hidden forever. Autumn came with its cool breath, the trees outside Edward Marshall's home painting themselves in quiet fire. One evening, after a long day, he felt a sharp ache in his chest. Not severe, not dangerous, but enough to remind him of the years he carried. Chloe Bennett was there, standing at the kitchen counter with her phone in hand. She noticed his hand against his chest, and for a moment her mask slipped. Concern flickered across her face. She hurried to his side, asking if he needed a doctor, if she should call someone. Edward waved her worry away. He told her it was nothing, just age talking. But in that moment he saw what he had longed to see. Her eyes soft, her hand steady on his shoulder, her voice trembling with something that felt real. For him, it was proof. Proof that she cared. Proof that the love he believed in was not only his own. Later that night, he sat at his desk and wrote her a letter. Not dramatic, not pleading. Just words about how much she meant to him, how her presence had given his life new meaning. He left it folded on her nightstand, believing she would read it, believing it would anchor her heart to his. But Chloe never opened it. The envelope stayed where it was, untouched. She didn't need to read it. She already knew what he felt, and for her, that was enough. Enough to know he was bound, enough to know she had time. Her mind, even as she held his hand that night, was already counting the days until she would be free again. The world outside their home kept calling Chloe. Invitations from friends, photos of trips splashed across her phone, laughter that felt lighter than the evenings spent in Edward's quiet house. She began to leave more often. "Dinner with friends," she would say. "Just a short trip into the city." Edward smiled, nodded, told her to enjoy herself. And when the door closed, he sat alone in the stillness, telling himself this was what young people did, that her freedom didn't mean his absence. But sometimes the proof was harder to deny. He noticed the way her phone lit up late at night. He heard the faint laugh in her voice when she answered calls in another room. He saw her returning later, her perfume carrying the scent of places he did not know. Chloe told herself she wasn't betraying him. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't unfaithful. She was just not ready to be owned by the weight of someone else's years. She wanted to feel her age, and Edward's love, though kind, felt heavy. One evening, he asked her to join him on a walk. The park was quiet, leaves crunching underfoot, the kind of evening where breath makes small clouds in the cool air. Edward spoke of the beauty of simply being together, of watching the world turn slowly. Chloe smiled, but her eyes drifted to the sound of younger voices in the distance. Laughter, energy, a rhythm she missed. She squeezed his hand, but in her heart, the question pulsed louder each day. When will it be time to leave? The night it broke open began like any other. Dinner was quiet. Edward tried to speak of a book he had started reading again. Chloe picked at her food, her phone face down but buzzing softly against the table. At last, he asked, not with anger, but with weary honesty. Chloe, are you here with me, or are you already somewhere else? Her fork paused, her eyes lifted, and for the first time she didn't bother to soften her reply. Edward, I'm 26. I can't live my life as if it's already ending. I can't sit in this house and wait for the years to pass. The words struck him, not because they were loud, but because they were true. His face fell, the lines of age deepening under the weight of her confession. I never asked you to give up your life, he whispered. Only to share it with mine. Chloe shook her head. Sharing feels like surrender, and I'm not ready to surrender. Silence stretched between them, heavy and final. Edward looked at her then, really looked. Not at the youth that had given him hope, but at the distance that had been there all along. He realized that what he believed in was love. What she believed in was freedom. And freedom, for her, meant an exit. He rose from the table, his hand resting on the back of the chair for balance. His voice was calm, but tired. Then you must do what you came here to do. And with that, the quiet fracture between them became a wound that could not be closed. The morning after their confrontation, the house felt different. Not broken, not loud, just different. Chloe Bennett moved through the rooms with a certain efficiency, as though she had been preparing for this moment long before the words were spoken. She gathered her things quietly, a suitcase pulled from the closet, clothes folded neatly, drawers emptied without hesitation. On the dresser sat the letter Edward Marshall had written weeks earlier, still unopened, still untouched. She looked at it once, then turned away. Edward sat in the armchair by the window, watching her. He didn't try to stop her. He didn't plead. He simply sat, hands folded, eyes heavy. For a moment, Chloe hesitated. A flicker of something, guilt, maybe even tenderness, brushed across her face. But it was gone as quickly as it came. She spoke softly. You gave me more than I asked for, but I can't give you what you want. Edward nodded. His voice, when it came, was steady. Then go, Chloe. Go and find whatever it is you're looking for. And with that, she wheeled her suitcase to the door. The sound of it rolling across the hardwood was louder than any argument could have been. When the door closed, the silence that followed was absolute. Outside, Chloe breathed deeply, the cool air filling her lungs. Freedom tasted sharp, almost sweet. She told herself she was young, that she had time, that she needed to chase her own life. But beneath that certainty was a shadow, the faint knowledge that she had left behind something real, even if it wasn't what she wanted. Inside, Edward remained in his chair. He stared at the photograph still leaning against the lamp, its frame catching the pale light of morning. He knew this was the end. And yet, the part of him that believed in love did not shatter. It only bent as it had before, and as it always would. Days turned into weeks, and the house grew used to its emptiness. The teacups remained on the shelf, untouched. The bed was wider, colder. The evenings stretched longer. Edward Marshall adjusted the way a man does when he has no choice. He filled his mornings with small routines, brewing coffee, reading the newspaper, tending the garden he once dreamed of sharing. Each act carried the echo of absence, but also the dignity of endurance. Sometimes, he walked past the nightstand where the letter still lay. He never moved it. He never tore it up. He simply let it remain, a quiet testament to words written in hope, never opened in return. Chloe Bennett, on the other hand, threw herself into the noise of the world. She went to parties, she traveled. She filled her days with movement, with laughter, with distraction. On the surface, she looked free. But in the stillness of night, she sometimes felt a hollow she could not name. It wasn't regret exactly. It was something softer, quieter. A memory of his steady hand, his gentle voice, the way he had looked at her as if she mattered more than the years between them. She had left because she wanted life on her own terms. But freedom, she discovered, was not as weightless as she imagined. For Edward, the loss was sharp but clean. He had believed in love, and though it had slipped away, the belief itself remained. For Chloe, the loss was murkier. Not of love she returned, but of love she might one day wish she had held. And so apart they carried what was left, one with a memory of giving, the other with a memory of leaving. Winter came. Snow gathered on the edges of Edward's porch, the world outside muffled in white. Inside, the house was warm but quiet. He sat once more in his armchair, a book open in his lap, though he was not reading. He was thinking. He thought of Chloe Bennett, not with bitterness, not with anger, but with the quiet acceptance of a man who had given what he could and lost what he must. He realized that love had not failed him, only circumstance had. Love was never a mistake. Believing in it, even at 63, was not foolish. It was human. Chloe, somewhere miles away, stood at a window overlooking a busy street. Lights flickered, cars passed, friends laughed in the next room. She pressed her hand against the glass, watching her reflection blur. She had chosen her freedom, she had followed her plan. But sometimes, when the noise faded, she felt the absence of something she could not quite name. For Edward, the lesson was simple. Love is never wasted, even when it is not returned. For Chloe, the lesson was harder. Freedom without sincerity can feel as empty as captivity. And so their story closed, not with reunion, not with resolution, but with reflection. A man who believed in love, a woman who believed in an exit. Two truths that touched, then parted, leaving behind silence and memory. The photograph still leaned against the lamp, the letter still sat unopened, and the quiet still spoke louder than any words could. And so, Edward Marshall's story closes in silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but of lessons learned, and love carried forward even when it could not stay. At 63, he discovered that believing in love is never wasted, even when it walks away. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments. What moment in Edward Marshall's journey moved you the most? And if you were listening closely, you might notice how often Edward Marshall's name came up. Drop your answer in the comments. We may feature your name in a shout-out as a thank you for being part of our Fiction Echoes family. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this one, the next chapter is already waiting. Just click the video that's about to appear, and we'll see you there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a moment of what happens next.